Today, I'm going to have a conversation with Andrew Feldmar, the Canadian-Hungarian psychotherapist. Andrew is a Vancouver-based psychologist who has worked as a psychotherapist in private practice for 49 years. Andrew was trained and supervised by R.D. Laing, the Scottish psychiatrist, who was one of the key figures of the counterculture in the 1960s. While Andrew works and lives in Canada, he often travels back to Budapest, Hungary. In 2006, Andrew and his colleagues and friends founded the Feldmar Institute. This nonprofit organization organizes popular events and annual summer school. In 2011, Andrew and his friend and colleague Dorka Büki started a special program for inmates in a prison in Hungary, in Balassagyarmat.
The program was a story circle where Andrew and Dorka used ancient folk stories. The story circle wasn't a prison theater, it was a much more complex psychological, ethical, cultural, and integrative project. The participants during weekly sessions of the story circle acted out their own life experiences using the world of symbolism presented in archaic folktales.
While Andrew's entire work is fascinating, and today we could talk about so many topics, I picked story therapy as I work with stories when I work with my clients and when I have my groups. And I'm very, very interested in what his experience is and why he chose stories. What is the magic power of stories when it comes to inner transformation? In my experience, stories can serve as portals and a door, an entering point for my client to have access to something essential, something deeper, something primal. Those of you who are interested in Andrew and Andrew's work, I can highly recommend his latest book, Credo. It's in English, which is great because most of his books are in Hungarian. And this is an incredible memoir. It's about him, and there's a special focus on his friendship, his work with R.D. Laing. And those of you who would like to meet Andrew in person and hear about his book from him, there is an event in Vancouver on the 11th of February in Banyan Books on 4th Avenue, which is a great place. So after this short introduction, let's see the interview. I hope you will enjoy it. First of all, thank you so much for accepting this invitation to have this conversation. I've been following your work for over 25 years now, and your work has been my inspiration to have the courage to step outside of the box as a person and as a therapist. While I know a lot about your work, I don't really have any information about the work you did with the inmates in Balassagyarmat in the prison. And I'm especially interested in this topic because I often use folktale mythical story therapy with my clients. So today I would like to focus on maybe 3 topics, but also we'll see where the conversation goes. First of all, the first one would be why stories? What is the magic power that stories carry when it comes to transformation? That would be the first. The second one would be your actual experience in the prison and working with people using story therapy. And then the last one is how this whole story therapy can be applied in a North American culture, in the land of Superman and Star Wars. So maybe we could start with the first one. Why stories?
Well, being a therapist, sooner or later, I had to come to terms with what is language and why are we languaging at all? What is communication? Very obvious distinctions turn out not to be obvious. the difference between what is said and the saying. It's far more magical and amazing that I am addressing myself to you, that I speak to you, than the content. The content could be quite trivial, but the fact that I'm addressing myself to you is magical. It's relational.
Yeah.
One of the essential paradoxes of therapy, as I came to realize, is only you can do it, and you can't do it alone. People who are in need of therapy have been hurt by other
Yeah.
people. Um, I think all forms of psychopathology is really a variety of post-traumatic stress. Nobody needs therapy if they weren't hurt.
Yeah.
So if somebody hurt you, then um, your relationship to people changes. The face that hurt you has no mark, like there is no
Yeah.
dot on the forehead of
Yeah.
people who will hurt you and a green dot on the forehead of people who would never hurt you. One definition of love that I have come to use a lot is I could hurt you and I won't.
Yeah.
Because if I said, oh, I couldn't hurt you, I'm lying. But the decision that although I could hurt you, I won't, and to give the promise is the essence of love. If
Yeah.
somebody could hurt you and does, they don't love you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, although what I have to do to live after a disaster, like how to, even the word trauma is overused because it covers up the uniqueness of uh, how we have been hurt.
Yeah.
In a way, we are incomparable, and that's uh, uh, so. The question is: there was a time when I was innocent. I expected that people would have my best interest close at heart. Turned out not to be true. When I first realized that somebody hurt me just because they could, I felt shattered.
Yeah.
And the question is how to live after the disaster. My mother was taken to Auschwitz for a year and a half. She returned, but she wasn't the same person. Her whole concept of what people can do to each other, her whole way of being in the world has changed. So it can't be scientifically in a generalized way approached, because the question for her was even whether to exist. There was a French underground um, uh, revolutionary during the Second World War by the name of Jean Amery, who wrote a book called On Suicide. And he was very badly treated, tortured by two Germans. And after the war, he saw them in a French cafe, laughing and having a good time. So he decided to write this book that he didn't want to participate in life. And that after what they did to him, he could never trust anybody.
Yeah.
And that there is no justice in the world because nobody called them to task for what they have done.
Yeah.
So if there is no justice and I can't trust anyone, I don't want to play. So he wrote the whole book so that people won't think that he is crazy.
Crazy. Yeah.
It was a
Yeah.
very rational choice that he made. So given all that, um, um, what actually the decision to go into Hungarian prison and work with the inmates came from several sources. One was, um, you probably know, I have done for many, many years work with psychedelics.
Yeah.
And Timothy Leary, the bad boy of psychedelics, did a couple of good things. One of which was that he did go into the worst places where people were dying, terminal cancer patients, or prisoners who were sentenced to death,
Yeah.
and did group LSD sessions with them.
Wow.
And he found that the fear of death, for example, disappeared if the person who took the LSD was capable or had the good fortune to experience a unitive experience, a death rebirth experience, a spiritual experience where you just know that you're not alone, you're not cut
Yeah.
off. You're one, not just with other human beings, but with all life,
Yeah. The
and
universe. Yeah.
further than the whole universe. So that unity feeling reduced pain and suffering, both in terminal cancer patients and in prisoners who were waiting for their execution.
Sorry, like it's interesting how it's so biologically imprinted in us that we are being alone or have a sense of belonging. It's transformational.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would say that the essence of psychotherapy, worth the name, is connection. Is
Yeah.
the job of the therapist is to go to where the patient is, not expect the patient to come to where the therapist is.
Exactly.
And not lead, but actually follow, keep company, so that the patient's fear is reduced and the patient can make better decisions. Going back to what Dorka Buki, who I worked with,
Yeah.
and I were thinking, was what other legal things could we do that
Okay. Yeah.
call this
Yeah.
unity experience, which in English we could call communion, partaking in something bigger than oneself. Like such an experience I had once in Hungary when I was 16. I was still in Budapest, and the British soccer team played the Hungarian soccer team, and the Hungarians beat the Brits 6-3. It was
Yeah.
a world championship game, and the Hungarians won.
Yeah.
I think there were probably 40,000 people in the arena, and they stood up as one, cheering.
Yeah.
And like that was a spiritual experience to actually feel myself to be a small part of
Of the
something
whole,
larger than
something
myself.
huge. Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
liberating. So we came up with what if we can play with prisoners? What if we just went in and did something where everybody, including ourselves, forgot where we came from, where we will have to go back to, but that there will be a time out, a special time, where we would participate in something that would be so absorbing that would become one.
Yeah, that self that they identify themselves with dissolves, and
That's right.
boundaries dissolve, and
That's right.
yeah.
And what we found was what we thought of was theater, and we figured improvisational theater would be better than say play a Hamlet
Yeah.
or King Lear. And the best start that we figured for improvisation was fairy tales that everybody would know.
Hmm.
Now, fairy tales, with Dorka Bucki, we wrote a couple of books on fairy tales. And just like with myths, with mythology and fairy tales, there's something archetypal about them. We wouldn't remember them, it wouldn't move us if it wouldn't be referring to common human experience that we can all resonate with. That's why children and adults for centuries have been taken by the same stories. Each story already has a luminosity because so many people have told it, so many people resonated with it. It made people cry, it made people laugh. It's like a piece of bread.
It carries the energy of
Yeah,
generations and generations, and
absolutely.
yeah.
It's like a piece of bread. If you and I broke bread and we took a bite of the same bread,
Hmm.
that's really the symbol of communion, because we could talk about abstract concepts like communism or psychotherapy, but the experience of eating
The
from the
same
same
bread that nourishes.
bird is, we are really sharing an experience. So we thought we'll start with basic fairy tales and encourage the prisoners to pick their own roles, improvise, find their own words, which, by the way, again, it's about language that I found that language asks you to surrender to it.
Hmm.
It's not like I want to use language. I want to give myself over to language. So in the situation of an improvisational theater, it actually happened that a dozen inmates for 3 hours, which we usually spent a day there weekly, they could forget where they were. The walls disappeared. They entered a mythical space. And to my greatest surprise, the most macho male, muscular prisoners willingly took on female roles. And they had enormous fun with each other, partaking, being small parts of something much larger than themselves. The motivation for them, by the way, was that we promised to, and we got permission from the prison authorities to, around Christmas, to open it up. And their children, their relatives, their families could come and view the production that we put together. We did this for many years, and not only was it fun for them, but it was fun for us. Now, here I would like to make a distinction between story or theater therapy and telling stories or playing theater. Like, I don't particularly want to say I ever do art therapy, because when I do art, I do art. In my mind, therapy is derived from the Greek word therapeutai, which actually meant people who paid attention and who went to an event from a community with the task of observing, coming home, and telling the community what happened there. So they were witnesses. So a therapist is a witness. A therapist is not a teacher. A therapist is not a
Yeah.
healer. A therapist pays attention. So I don't. What I thought we were doing was not therapy. It happened. The side effect was
It was
that
therapeutic, but yeah, it's not therapy.
people
Yeah.
changed. Something happened. Their relationships changed. Um, uh, just the experience of doing something together, of not being alone, of being able to contribute to something that is a common production, made
And maybe
enormous
expressing
difference.
something, and maybe expressing, having the freedom of stepping out of this shell
Yeah, yeah.
and
For
showing
me,
something that it's inside, not just the
yeah.
facade.
One of the psychoanalysts who I learned most from is D.W. Winnicott, and he wrote a book called Playing and Reality, in which basically he talks about the therapy space as a play space, that people who uh, suffer because of their dogmas. And the job of the therapist is to be playful and not be dogmatic. Um, Actually, in ancient Greece, the therapists were called the skeptics. And the skeptics helped and relieved the dogmatics by one single question:
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
That was mostly what the skeptics asked. Are you sure? And in a way, once we begin to play, that's how children learn, by the way, through play.
Yeah.
Play gives such freedom because it has no consequence. So in a way, in the circle, we could commit murder, we could commit rape, we could do anything, but there were no consequences.
Hmm.
So we could play with everything. And just as, if cogwheels, two cogwheels, which are supposed to move freely,
Mm.
um, when they jam in an engine, in a machine, it's called, because there is not enough play, a
Yeah.
very interesting use of the word. So there has to be play for things to go smoothly. No play, things jam.
Yeah.
So people who end up in prison, when we were talking with them, my question always was, why did you get caught?
Hmm.
Like, if I am on this earth and I can freely choose, I might want to be an outlaw. But why would I want to be an outlaw who gets
Who gets
imprisoned?
caught? Yeah. Yeah.
So that
Great
was what
question.
we were talking about, not why are you an outlaw? So it wasn't a moral or
Mm.
an ethical issue. It was more, uh, why do you um, why do you want to get caught?
Mm.
Uh, what are you guilty of? What's your story? And how can your story be woven into an archetypal story, which, by the way, again, frees one of one's isolation? Because the worst thing is, nobody's like me. I'm all cut off. I'm uniquely horrible. Once I can place myself through the ages, that there were 2,000 years ago, there were people who were as stupid as I am now, or did awful things like I do now. Already, I'm not alone.
Mm.
Actually, that horrendous image, like, if I were a Martian and I came to Earth and, say, landed in Italy, and I saw this man crucified on a cross all over the place, I would get the hell out of here. It was because it's clear that the person didn't put himself on. that other people nailed him. You can't nail yourself to the cross all by yourself, so it wasn't voluntary. So the creatures who live on this planet do things like
They
that to
do.
each
They do
other.
things like that. Yeah.
Like that's a major symbol for humanity. Boggles the mind. However, when you feel someone is crucifying you, having that image in mind, you don't feel alone. Even in suffering, there is a relief when you think thousands were crucified like this. Like
Mm.
people have gone, this is an experience I can share with countless others. Women who give birth and are reminded and can tune in that millions of women have gone through the pain
Yeah.
of giving birth. The experience of pain diminishes
Yeah.
because pain, the subjective experience of pain, I think is um, uh, correlated with how cut off I feel.
Exactly.
If I
Exactly.
feel cut off, the pain is unbearable. If I can connect, just hold someone's hand who cares about me and I care, the subjective experience of pain diminishes.
Yeah.
So the moment I feel connected, my pain diminishes. So I
Yeah.
think that's how that project started, and it was a small theoretical idea, and we found years of very positive confirmation in practice that actually that kind of play, that kind of involvement in archetypal material, which fairy tales provide, is a great reducer of pain and suffering and allows for
Yeah.
communion and togetherness.
So did they change the story, or you picked certain fairy tales and they were acting that out, improvising, of course, but or did they bring in their own stories as well?
The storyline was brainstormed. Everything was
Okay.
brainstormed.
So
So
so the characters were okay, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, the characters were invented. It could
Mm-hmm.
start with a well-known, commonly known fairy tale.
Mm-hmm.
And then from their own experience, they made it into something that was meaningful to them.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
ended up at times almost unrecognizable of where we started. But it was a common production, and everybody who participated had a part in it, in the story as well as the enactment.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, did you find that the archetypal, like the characters in the story, in a fairy tale, they had special impact on them? Do you think that it would have been different if it was just a story that they made up? I mean, working with the characters of the, I don't know, king or a queen or a dragon, like these archetypal characters, did those have an impact on them?
Um, I think so. For example, Aristotle, already more than 2,000 years ago, said that the primary virtue was courage. And he said primary not just because it's the first in a list of virtues, but because without courage, no other virtue can manifest. Um, so in many fairy tales, there are acts of courage which get rewarded. Um,
Yeah,
uh, Now that mobilized their own individual experiences of courage,
of
feeling of
courage. Yeah,
courage. In many fairy tales, there are the good and the evil are exaggerated. The white is very white, the black is very black.
yeah,
So uh, their freedom of choice of uh, whether to go right or left whether to help someone or not, whether to trick someone and betray someone or not. Fairy tales are full of ethics, and ethics is how we treat each other. And many fairy tales have kind of conclusions that if you do good, you can expect good. Now,
Totally.
of course, that's not true, because now there is. I'm thinking of a Buddhist teacher, Chogyam Trungpa,
Mhm.
who founded Naropa University. He used to hit people over the head with his fan, saying, suffering is not punishment, pleasure is not reward, which I think is
Yeah.
very existential, very, very phenomenological. Fairy tales are more idealistic, because a fairy tale would say you'll be rewarded for goodness. And sooner or later, my mother used to tell me, God doesn't punish with a stick.
Mm.
Like her, she wanted me to think that she knows everything, God knows everything, and can't get away with anything. Well, we know that's not true.
Well, that's not true. The way I see fairy tales and what happens in fairy tales, yes, there is like I totally agree that just because we do good, it doesn't mean that the world will reward us. But reward, like the reward is the inner transformation. So if I, like in the story when the hero starts the journey and meets the poor little wounded animal, and then some characters, they just walk by, they don't care. And then, of course, the hero would care, the hero would help and share the bread or whatever and heal the little animal. I think that fairy tales or mythical folk tales, they also talk about this inner transformation, who I become, what kind of person, like kind of going towards enlightenment, if I want to, use a big
Yeah.
word. So maybe there is no reward out there, but there is an inner reward, who I am, what I represent.
And interestingly, that's what Aristotle said when he wrote the first book on ethics, as far as we know. And he said that he wasn't writing it in order to tell people how to be good. He wrote it in order to tell people how to be happy. Eudaimonia is the Greek word for happiness. And the whole book of ethics was about happiness. He basically said, if you don't do good, if you don't treat people well, there is no way you can be happy.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
So, as you say, it was about inner transformation. Aristotle thought that ethics was important for your own happiness and also to allow other people to treat you badly. They won't be happy and you won't be happy. So it gave also encouragement to take care of yourself as an ethical moment that
Yeah.
if you let people hurt you, it's not good for them.
That's so true. That really resonates with me. And it comes to compassion, of course, that when I see someone hurting someone, there is this compassion. I see that person hurting, like the person who hurts is hurting. And yeah, if I allow that to happen, then I basically feed the hurt that the other person has. Yeah.
You're an enabler.
Enabler. Yeah, exactly. Enabler. Yeah. So you saw a transformation, you saw playfulness and sense of belonging and community when you were working with the prisoners. How what do you know about the lasting impact the story circle had on their
Well,
lives?
as far as we know, the in-prison incidents of aggression diminished among those who participated in these. And once they regained their freedom, the rate of them returning diminished. So there
Okay.
are statistics. The prison authorities kept statistics that it was not just fun, that it was effective.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the prison guards raised an eyebrow because they thought that suddenly the prisoners had more fun than they did.
Oh, they got jealous, right?
Envious and
They
jealous.
need a different, like they need a separate little
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
group. Yeah.
we had to work very hard to keep the authorities away so we would have this protected, almost sacred space.
Yeah.
Um, at that particular prison, there was a beautiful circular dome-like room in which
Mm.
we did this. So, and with stained glass. So it really
Oh,
contributed to, as soon as we entered, it's
like
like
a sacred haven. Yeah.
it was a sacred space. It was a time out of time and a place out of place.
Yeah. It's almost like the safe house that you talk about, often talk about. Of course, it's not the same, but it's similar that you enter this sacred space where you
Yeah,
can be who you are and you can ask for what you need.
yeah.
And then of course so how like I was going to ask about why it ended, but I think I do know why it ended, and it has something to do with the Hungarian uh, government, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was uh, all the best projects that I have ever seen to do with so-called mental health. Um, the best ones end because people who don't participate in it become envious.
Yeah. Yeah.
R.D. Lang, my teacher, used to say that if you propose a program where it's clear that the people who will participate in it will be hurt and suffer, there will be lots of money for
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But if you propose a program where they benefit and they are having fun, sooner or later the funds
Yeah.
will dry up
Yeah.
because there is still a mentality that people who are not ordinary should be punished, not rewarded.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's unfortunate, but
It is. It is.
yeah.
It is. Do you have you tried to work with stories in your private practice at all, or in Canada?
In a sense, when I listen to people, I listen to what they tell me as stories. And in a way, the skeptical approach of "are you sure" is questioning the stories people come into therapy with. Like, are you sure? Like, could 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 there be another story
Mm-hmm.
here? Uh, in at certain moments, I almost feel like an editor who is trying to help a
Yeah.
writer. I mean, one way to think of our life is that we are all the authors of our own life, as if like every chapter.
Yeah.
Um, I believe, like the existentialist, that essentially we are condemned to freedom. So even if you think that you're not free, that's a fiction, that's a story.
Mm-hmm.
Then you might get interested in stories of liberation. Like,
Yeah.
for instance, I noticed that all the James Bond movies, their ending is really a birth scene.
Mm.
Usually there is often a burning structure where the hero is running, holding on to the hand of a beautiful woman,
Yeah.
and everything is collapsing behind them. And there is music of a certain beat. Now, if you check it, the beat of the music at those moments is fetal heartbeat.
Mm.
The burning house is the mother's womb is about 37 degree, 38,
Yeah.
37 centigrade. And you arrive in a room which is probably 22. So there's a drop in temperature. So all of us who were born would experience a drop in temperature, escaping from something that's being destroyed
Yeah.
that cannot be sustained into somewhere. It's a fleeing, it's an escape from somewhere with a drop of temperature. And the fetal heartbeat during that time is a very memorable event. So I think that all viewers of James Bond movies participate in the archetype of being born.
Yeah.
And part of their success, these movies' success, is that it appeals to everyone who was ever born,
Yeah.
except
It just
not through
talks to
schizophrenia.
that. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I've never thought of this, the James Bond movies, because of course I recognize the archetypal stories
Yeah.
in Star Wars or
And
Superman.
actually, the woman and the connection is the umbilical cord, because
Mm.
you come out with half of you, the better half, still in.
Yeah.
You're separated from your lover. You had intercourse with your placenta for 9 months. You were penetrating each other with
Yeah.
every heartbeat. You ejaculate into the placenta, and the placenta ejaculates into you. So Shiva and Shakti in eternal intercourse
Yeah.
in the Hindu
Yeah.
mythology
Hinduism. Yeah.
is a memory of intrauterine experience. And one of the things I have found was that the most archetypal stories, like, for example, the Egyptian story of Isis and Osiris, they all refer back to intrauterine experience. Isis and Osiris were twins in the womb of the sky goddess Nut. And they were already lovers in her womb. Well, that's the placenta
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
fetus with ejaculating blood back and forth,
Mm.
24/7. And then, for example, the story of Isis being cut into tiny pieces and scattered around the countryside. And Isis, his lover, gathering all the pieces and putting him back again
Mm.
and brings him to
Mm.
life. Well, you can't escape from realizing that that's the memory of some strange cellular memory of if blood had consciousness, the blood coming out is scattered around the countryside of the placenta, all over the place in tiny bits,
Mm.
to bits, and then magically it's gathered, refreshed, and brought back again into one. So this death and rebirth occurs with every heartbeat in
Yeah.
the womb.
Yeah.
So all these mythical themes, I think, speak to us on a very, very deep level of memory that we all participated in, regardless of time, because for thousands of years, the fetal experience is similar. You know,
Yeah.
every newborn baby is a Stone Age baby, except now a Stone Age baby is born to a 21st century mother,
Yeah.
which there will be clashes, because a Stone Age baby born to a Stone Age mother, that's what every baby even today expects, which is 24/7 body contact, because
Yeah.
originally a mother would just tie the baby to her body,
Absolutely.
and there wouldn't be a separate room into which,
Yeah. Yeah.
separation was not like what it is today. So all that stuff, I think, appears in stories, and um, uh, like there were many psychoanalysts who were interested. For example, the splitting of the mother. It's very hard for a child to keep in mind that the mother is horrible and the mother is wonderful. Like to love and to hate the
Hate
very same person is very difficult. So fairy tales allow you to have
the
good
wicked,
feelings
yeah,
and
the
good,
wicked stepmother, and yeah,
so that the bad mother gets personified in a different person than the good mother. So it's very helpful, very useful.
yeah, yeah. Do you ever tell stories? Like, do you ever pull an actual story when you work with clients, or?
I usually don't initiate anything. What I
Mm-hmm.
find is that there are people who tell their own stories. There are people who bring in art, music that speaks to where they are lost in the woods,
Yeah.
and that helps me to find them. I usually don't initiate anything. I usually try to learn their language. I usually try to enter their stories, which I think also I wouldn't have a job as a therapist if parents would be attentive to their children.
Oh, that's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah.
Because with
Yeah.
some people who come into therapy, it seems to me I'm the first one in their life who actually listen to them.
Absolutely.
So I don't
Absolutely.
want to interfere with any, I don't have to have any idea. I don't have to know anything.
Yeah.
I think for decades, I thought that my job was to understand people.
Mm.
Then I realized it's hopeless. I will never understand anybody.
Yeah.
Well, plus, it would be a kind of colonization because if I wanted to understand you, I would have to reduce you to
Yeah.
my own terms. And
Yeah.
you're infinitely different from anything I can imagine. But
Yeah.
the good news is that you can love somebody whom you don't understand.
Yes. Yes. And while we are infinitely different, underneath, we belong to the same one. So there's the oneness and the infinite difference. So connecting with the oneness, or opening that space of oneness while walking together, for me, that's that space where I invite people in.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's I think that's the secret. Sometimes people ask why I still working. I'm in my 84th year, but I could never understand burnout. I think anybody who experiences burnout is doing something wrong.
Well, they're
Uh,
doing something. They're doing it instead of being.
Instead of going to a place where my experience is if like it either happens to both of us or it happens to neither of us.
Mm,
The togetherness that's healing, the connection, it's healing for me as well.
totally.
So
Totally.
usually I feel better at the end of the day than at the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah. Well, I know when I feel so-called drained in the end of a session, I know that I wasn't present
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
other person and for myself. So yeah, if I'm there, then it's a beautiful connection
yeah.
for both of us. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even in psychedelic sessions, I don't offer music, but I'll play any music that the person who is tripping wants to play. So, because who am I to presume that I know?
Yeah.
It would just encourage transference. So, if you're in therapy with me and you get preoccupied with a fairy tale or a story, I'll get into it with you. But it would be presumptuous of me to offer one.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That would
Yeah.
just be, I'm the expert. Like,
Yeah. So I bring the story that you need, and yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the end of transference is when people realize that nobody knows.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
Exactly.
we just inquire together and try to figure out between us what's going on.
Yeah. So basically, the transformation the trick, not the trick, but the magic of transformation is connection.
Yeah.
And it can happen, using psychedelics, being in the connection without psychedelics, bringing, telling stories or not telling stories, but the
Yeah.
real transformation is the connection is the,
Connection
yeah,
and playing, freely
playing,
playing,
yeah,
without being shamed, without being guilted, without
yeah,
there being any kind of dogma,
yeah,
so that you don't have to pay for connection with loss of freedom.
yeah, yeah.
Because that's depression, for example. So many people are depressed. I think it's the result of having to play roles. Like,
Well,
I have to be the good son of my parents. I have to be the
yeah,
good husband of my wife. I have to be the good father of my children. Roles, and nobody's interested in Andrew.
exactly. I think it was you who said that depression is the lack of self-expression. I'm trying to be someone different than who I am, and it's exhausting.
I,
That is a burnout.
my equation is depression equals oppression plus lack of expression.
Okay, yeah, oppression. Yeah, yes,
And funnily enough, they are all shun. They all end depression,
yeah, yeah,
oppression, lack of expression.
yeah.
Uh, so it's a political event, not a psychological event.
It is. It is. It is. It is. Well, Andrew, thank you. Thank you so much.
You are very welcome. Bye.
Okay. Okay, bye. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and check out my website www.manka.ca.